All right, welcome to First Things First. I'm Rob Garrison. I'm the CEO of Mercado, and today we've got a very special episode. As you can see, I'm here live with Scott Felsenthal. Scott is the CEO of Whitmor, and we're live at their beautiful facility here in Tennessee. So, Scott, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop a note, and we'll try to get as many questions as we can answered, particularly from Scott. So just pop them into the bottom of the screen, and I'll field them as we go. So maybe we could do, if you don't mind, Scott, let's get started by, if you wouldn't mind sharing for the audience your story, either personally or your company, the foundations. You've got a really rich heritage, and I'd love for them to hear kind of how you all got started and what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Rob, and thanks for being here. Pretty cool. So Whitmor, we're a fourth generation family-owned business, started in 1946. Oh, and this is my uncle, third generation.
How are you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Hi, I'm Sam.
We're live, so say hi to the audience.
Hello. I gotta go take a minute.
Crazy things happen in a family business.
Nice to meet you.
So 1946, company started up in Brooklyn, New York. My great-grandfather, who was on the wall behind me, can't see him, and then my grandfather is on another wall here. But company started up there in 1946 and eventually migrated down to Arkansas, where we became a manufacturer of home storage products from 1946 all the way through the really late 1990s. And we became an importer very quickly in the late 1990s, like everyone had to do. I believe the statistic is 1996, we were 100% manufacturing, and by 1997, we were 90% importers.
Wow.
So happened very quickly, so we became an importer, began to build significant relationships with factories that we still have today, mostly in Asia. And 2008, our manufacturing facility, turned into a distribution facility in Arkansas. But in 2008, a tornado came through, knocked down a third of the facility. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it allowed us the opportunity to move to where we are today, which is just south of Memphis in South Haven, Mississippi, where we have a 500,000 square foot warehouse and our office staff all in one.
So, Scott, I'm kind of curious. I just want to riff off that a little bit. So you essentially grew up in this business, and now you've risen all the way up to running the business. So can you tell us about your personal journey? That must have been fascinating, because you've watched it from ground high, basically, right? Yeah,
so all of our family in the business, and I'll talk about that in a second.
Well, you just met his uncle.
Yeah, just met my uncle who came on, waved his arms on the screen. But we all feel like we grew up in the business. I can remember when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, being at my grandfather's house with Sears buyers and all these merchants there and our sales team in town. And I kind of just grew up learning the business that way. But we all kind of feel that way. So my Uncle Sandy, who just popped on, he's the last member of the third generation in the business. My father was in the business for 39 years and retired a couple of years ago. And then I had an uncle in the business. He retired about 6 years ago. Sandy has 2 kids in the business. One is handling our Amazon account, and the other one is more on the operational side of things. So we've got, fortunately, it works very well for us. There's a lot of stories out there of family businesses gone wrong, but we're very blessed to have good family dynamics, and it's been a big part of our success.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. So I want to transition a little bit. So you sell, if you could see this facility, it's great because they've got a big distribution center attached to this and a big board full of brand names. You sell to some of the biggest brand names in the country. So I guess the question is, how do you accommodate both the complexity and the scale of selling to people like Amazon and to Target? So maybe just transition a little bit into supply chain. How do you think about that as you're bringing on those big brands and supporting them?
Yeah, I think number one thing for us is just operational excellence. So whether we're shipping Amazon, Walmart, Target, whoever it may be, at the end of the day, you're shipping cartons of products on a pallet to a retailer out of your distribution facility. So it's kind of like, Hoosiers, the basketball movie, where they're kind of trained to think, the stadiums are always going to look different, but the court is the same.
Yeah.
And not to say that customers are the same, but if you have the foundational aspect of operations down to a pretty good science, like our team, like we like to think we have. We're not perfect, but and certainly the last couple of years have definitely taught us we're not perfect. But if you have that kind of operational excellence built into what you do, you're really just slightly changing your actions based on the requirements of those retailers, how you ship things, how you route things, how you confirm orders, et cetera. So if you got the core piece down, which in our world is our operations, then the rest are just small little pivots that you learn to deal with.
So do you see any changes in the supply chain in terms of, you've been selling to the big box retailers, I know, for a long time. Has their business changed? Have you had to change your business to accommodate the way that they're now selling to their customers?
Yeah, they changed a lot. Whether it was around the Trump tariff times when retailers were trying to get creative in terms of how they brought products in to avoid some of that stuff. There were some changes there that we had to be flexible with them to comply with, or just normal course of business things. I mean, everyone, whether it's the supplier like us or the retailer, you're always looking to be as efficient as possible and streamline your operations. So not only are we constantly striving to do that, but every single retailer we work with strives to do that as well. So there's changes along the way sometimes.
So I have to ask, because you gave me the opportunity, you said, well, we thought we were excellent until the last couple of years. How was the pandemic? How did you think about that? Because, I watched the whole world tip off its axis, essentially. I can't imagine what it was like for you as a business, both with suppliers overseas and customers, big customers here. What did that look like for you? What was the pandemic time for you? Maybe the 2 years that it was kind of in full force.
Yeah, I remember, and it's probably a similar story for most big distribution companies, but I remember March 2020, one day being in the office, or I was actually probably at home, given it was after COVID started, learning of the amount of retailer POs that got canceled in a given week. And all of us and the rest of the world was like, what's going on? It was scary as hell. And in the weeks to follow, people kind of figured it out and orders kind of picked back up. But what we learned over the 2-3 year period is, initially with COVID, it was the Chinese suppliers that were really, really being, choked, if you will. They had so much product. They were shutting down.
Too much.
The demand in the U.S. was crazy. They couldn't produce product quick enough. But not only could they not produce it, then you had the whole container issue where, if you could even get containers, were you going to pay the crazy prices that required to import? So our experience was, we had a lot of Asian suppliers that were having to hold product for us on their factory floors, and that's not something that's not the best plan for anybody. But it was the nature of the game at the time, and factories had 15, 20, 25 containers worth of product sitting on factory floors until we can move it. So long story short, at the beginning of COVID, we were having to really help our suppliers, whether it was prepaying for some goods that was just sitting there and they weren't getting paid for, or whatever. But now on the backside of COVID, when importers and distributors like us have been glutted with so much inventory from containers sitting in China and finally sailing this year at reasonable prices, now it's kind of, hey, suppliers, help us through this period, because clearly with all this inventory hitting at once, it's very hard to pay all your suppliers like you normally would in the course of business. So it's been a full circle journey where we have helped the suppliers are helping us, and really that's at the heart of our company, is relationships, and the importance of relationships, especially in times like these.
Well, so speaking of relationships, how was it on the other side? So you're talking about the sort of topsy-turvy with the suppliers. How about with your customers? Were they supportive of you during that period of time, or were they even more demanding? Because everybody was in the same boat. So just kind of wondering how you kept all your customers reasonably satisfied during that time.
Good question. For a majority of the COVID period, most customers were understanding, because they were, it wasn't just a story from Whitmor, it was a story from everyone. But there were certainly a couple of retailers, one of which I won't name, but many might be able to guess on this call. We're not understanding, and put threats out there, and it ends up they're one of the retailers that might not be here much longer. But yes, there was a lot of partnership through COVID at every single level, because it was truly one of those events where we were all in this together. suppliers, retailers, factories, distributors, importers, freight forwarders. I mean, it was a collective journey that was painful, but we all knew we had to do it together or else there was no end.
So the last piece of that triangle, how about for your team here? You're not here, but he's got a beautiful facility here, really great environment, but all of your workers suddenly weren't here. So how did you manage that challenge? Because everybody was dispersed. It was a very difficult time. How did you keep the team sort of focused and on board during that period?
Yeah, it was an operational challenge because we have a warehouse to run. You can't do that remote.
True, yeah.
And our warehouse team, managers, supervisors, I mean, they were incredible. We never missed a beat. We went through the staggering of office staff, but the warehouse staff was a constant, solid group of people, and they just worked through it. And they, thank God, we never had to really shut down the company for COVID. We had a couple, departmental issues from here time to time, but it was really a team effort, and our warehouse teams were incredible.
Fantastic. Well, so on to happier subjects, I guess. I'm glad we got through that, knock on wood. Well, we're past that. I was kind of curious, since you mentioned all of these complexities, so you're having to communicate with your internal employees, with your suppliers overseas, with your retailers. So what role does technology play in your supply chain? How do you keep all that in? It's tons of information, right? Tons of SKUs, tons of different requirements. How do you keep all of that together from a technology standpoint? What does that look like for y'all? Yeah,
technology has become a bigger piece of our business year after year. And obviously with the implementation from years ago, Mercado, plays a big piece in our supply chain efforts. On the freight forwarder side, we use a freight forwarder that's very, technology savvy. So there's bits and pieces of technology that brought together in ways that our IT and kind of our business intelligence people can bring data together. It's been really powerful. It's not perfect because sometimes the data that you're getting from all these systems is not perfect, but that'll be a continued challenge of how can technology be perfect? And it's about the data, making sure the data is perfect, but technology is going to continue playing a bigger role for us, as well as many that import.
Well, and just maybe one not so technical question, but you have your in-house IT team managing your WMS or your ERP, your system of record. And then you mentioned you've got applications of data coming in from different sources. So here's command and control. So they're basically looking for the data in and out, and you're receiving it from other people, normalizing it, using it for the purposes. That's kind of how.
That's right.
That's kind of the structure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to go a completely different direction if I could, especially since I'm looking at your great grandfather and your grandfather. I wish y'all could see him here. It's great, and his uncle. But I'm kind of curious, where do you see this business 10 years from now? Can you think that far in advance, or is it too tough to predict where you think Whitmor will head? Because you're now the next person taking this thing forward, and they're all counting on you.
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think my answer before the last couple of years is probably different than it is today. And I think the answer today is we want to be a company that provides a great workplace for our employees, that demonstrates consistent, steady growth, but we don't have to be the biggest, and I want us to be as healthy a company as we can, even if that means we're not going to be as big as we potentially could be.
Okay.
So I think the last few years certainly has made us sit back and think about who do we want to be when we grow up. And I want to be that company that's here for many, many more generations, providing great jobs to great people, as opposed to we have got to be X amount of revenue in so and so years. The numbers will take care of itself. But I think first and foremost, what the last several years of the business has taught us is that financial health is everything, and we need to focus. Not that we've always been a healthy company, but we got to focus hard on making sure we're making the right decisions that might sacrifice some growth, but continue to allow us to be the healthy company we want to be.
Yeah, so that's great. And I was thinking about the direction from two sides. We're seeing a lot of changes. Everybody's sort of omnichannel, so people are selling in more and varied ways than they ever have before. And you took me in a direction I didn't expect, but it's the right one, which is focus on great product. Do you see that changing? Do you see yourself moving into different sales channels? I know you're primarily selling to retailers now. Do you see other sales channels available to you that you're going to pursue? Or is it mostly just focused around great product design and continue to sell more to the people that you're close to and that you do business with and pursuing that channel?
Yep, good question. Our focus as a company has always been being the best partners to our retailers that we can be. For instance, we don't sell product from our website to the consumer. Why? Because we feel like that competes with our retailers. Sure. We're not a company that 5 years ago got into the direct-to-consumer business. It's just a decision we made at the time to really stay focused on our retail partners. And I think the pendulum has swung. I mean, it swung very far to you got to ship direct-to-consumer, you got to drop ship, you got to do all these things. And we do a little of that, but I think the pendulum has swung back where brick-and-mortar retail, it's not going away. It's going to evolve. Right. And we want to make sure that our relationships with our retailers are as strong as they can be so that we can evolve that process with them. We want to be a company that continues to evolve with our retailers and not lose sight of that by going off into different tangents that could potentially compete with them. So we really focus on the retailers. We believe in retail. We believe in brick and mortar retail. And that's been our focus.
Well, I think statistically it backs you up, right? We saw the big spike in e-commerce because of the pandemic, but most of that is shifted back to the stores, right? Good old stores. So when you think about product design, I'm just curious, how do you stay on top of what's the latest in the organization category, and how do you stay a leader in that? How do you all work on products and product design at Whitmor?
We have an internal product development team, designers, but if you think about it, with the amount of retailers that we sell product to, we're constantly getting data from those retailers. We're getting POS data, we're getting feedback and ideas from the merchants themselves. So we've got all these funnels of product ideas coming into our teams, and that's really kind of how we know the price points we have to hit. We know our supplier capacities and restraints and creativity, if you will. So we have all the tools, and then we've got the data flowing in. So we use that data, we use the tools, we use the great minds of our product development team, and we just constantly try to innovate, because at the end of the day, you really don't want to be just another commodity business. You want to provide value to your customers and our retail partners, and so it's a big focus for us.
Any trends you're seeing in your industry? Anything changing? I know it's been a hot category.
Yeah, at home, we're very lucky, thankful to be in the home category. Historically, in recessionary times, our business does very well. The pandemic time obviously was a very good time for businesses like ours. There's less companies in our industry today for obvious reasons. We've had some pretty significant competitors go out of business the last couple of years. So there's opportunities for us, but we have to be very careful what we go after for the reason we spoke before. We don't want to just go after growth for the sake of going after growth. We want to be very, very smart about it, and that's kind of where our mentality has changed over the last couple of years.
So that's a solid plan. I'm going to ask you the flip side, though. What keeps you awake at night?
Gosh,
maybe nothing.
I try to block out a lot of the noise out there. I've always been someone that kind of thinks contrarian, so I don't. If the mass media is thinking one thing, I'm usually thinking the other. Not that I'm always right, but I just so I try not to let the noise get to me. But there's freight rates have come down so much that you almost wonder, is this really real? I think there's something out there that no one's thinking about that could potentially throw things off.
Yeah.
Whether it's this whole diesel shortage issue that's being talked about or other things, I don't know. I just everyone says rates are down so much, which they are, but I think everyone just feels like we're back to where we were, and I don't think so.
It's pendulum swung maybe too far in either direction. So is there something that's coming? Yeah.
I don't know. So we always try to run our company in a way that we're prepared for the worst, but prepared for the best, and somewhere in the middle is where things shake out.
That's a great answer. And then I guess one of the things I was thinking you might answer, or what keeps you awake at night as well, or that I think about is I've been doing this a long time, and it's an interesting time from a sourcing perspective. So for a long time, we sort of rode the China wave, and now there's a lot of talk about sourcing shifts. How do you think about that? Does that keep you awake at night, or are you well positioned, with suppliers in multiple countries and so forth, that you can manage that?
Yeah, we've diversified our manufacturing quite a bit over the last few years. Obviously, many like us, and us included, are still pretty heavy in Asia and China. So if I lose sleep over anything, it's certainly what that could look like in years to come. You know, a lot of political stuff, a lot of conversation about China and relations with the United States. So what gives you some comfort is we're not, so many companies are in the same boat. I mean, we've diversified our sourcing channels significantly in the last couple of years, but China is always, I mean, they're just superior in many ways with infrastructure and manufacturing that you really can't cost. You really just, it's hard to take a lot away from that. So we'll see what evolves, but that's a big piece of the future.
Okay, so we've got about 8 minutes left. I'd like to shift, if I could. One of the things that's always impressed me about you, Scott, is what at least I see from the outside is the culture here. I read your posts on LinkedIn. I've met, many members of your team, and I'm always impressed by how, at least from the outside, how cohesive this place seems and how positive it seems. How do you think about culture? How do you keep this team environment going and think about the future at the same time?
Yeah, we are a family business, but a lot of companies, not a lot of companies, but some companies I know that are a family business. It's one thing to say you are, it's another thing to act like you are.
Yeah.
So we take it very seriously to not just say we're a family business, operate a business, but that everyone here is family. People aren't a number. They're real people with real families and real problems of their own and real strengths that they all have and kind of bring to us. And we try to make sure that we give people flexibility and empowerment to do their jobs. And it's a tough environment. I mean, this type of industry is not for everybody, especially the last couple of years, but it's not an industry where you come in and you've got a list from A to Z and you're going to go down your list every day. It's, you might be on point number one and then you get to point number two and then you're at the last thing on your, I mean, there's just so much that comes up in a given day with retail on the supply side that you've got to be so flexible, and employees that embrace that really, we have employees that have been with us 55 plus years.
Really?
Handful of 40 plus, 30 plus.
Wow.
It is really people from every generation.
Almost like family.
Yeah, it is. We have an employee that has worked for.
You have employees that worked here who are older than.
For the first generation of the business, second generation, third, and now fourth. And it's she is here every day, and she is unbelievable. And it's we're just if you're authentic and genuine with your employees, even if the truth sometimes isn't what they want to hear, I think that carries a lot of weight. And we try to be as authentic and as we can be, and I think that's part of the key.
So playing off that a little bit, how do you we have a lot of young people tuning in, so either one of two things, or maybe both. How do you think about bringing people into your organization? What are the key attributes that you look for, and/or what kind of advice would you give for people looking to enter into business? We've got college students and others, and I'm just kind of curious, how do you think about the advice that you give to people who you're attracted to when you're interviewing people? What kind of skill sets do you look for? What advice do you give people to get prepared for this type of an environment?
Yeah, it's been a challenging 2-3 years because what's different about the last couple of years as the previous years in terms of hiring is it's been such an employee-driven market, meaning it's been very competitive. So the interviewing process and what your ideal candidate, your mindset has had to shift a little bit. Yeah, it's so it hasn't been a perfect world for hiring, but you certainly want, for us, it's people that understand urgency, that don't have to have structure, that can be, team driven and, all the stuff you want in an employee, but people that you can just really see buy into the flexibility required in a business like ours. And it's hard to describe. You just kind of see and feel it when you talk to the right people.
A lot of employee referrals?
Yes, we do push that because that's kind of part of the family concept. So if you've got great friends or people that you think would be here, let's do it together.
Yeah, let's bring them in. Yeah. And so just final question is an open question. Anything else that I didn't cover that you want to share, whether it's about Whitmor or the supply chain business or technology or anything that I didn't cover? Any final thoughts before we close out here?
One thing someone told me a few months ago, and this was so true, is that supply chain used to be a department, and now supply chain is a company. It is something I think about often, and that is very reflective here. It's not our supply chain team that's the only one making decisions anymore. It is so many people involved in supply chain related conversations here. So the fact that supply chain, certainly is a department with unbelievable people, but so much of that decision making process has to be more holistic at the company level to be able to navigate what has been a crazy couple of years. So it's been interesting to see how supply chain, terminology and things that only our supply chain team would know a couple of years ago is like understood by the company.
Okay, so that question wasn't planned, but I have to tell you, I've got an ear-to-ear grin because I grew up in this business, and to his point, nobody knew what we even did for a long time, and now he's saying it's a company. I saw a meme recently, I guess it was about 6 months ago, but it was a girl saying, I couldn't get a date for 6 months, supply chain issues. So it's not only become a company, it's become a thing. And everybody knows what the supply chain is. So for me, I've kind of come full circle, going into a business I knew nothing about to now becoming sort of the center of things. So that's a great way to end the show. So thank you all to the audience. I see we've got some questions. Sorry we didn't get a chance to get to those, but we'll respond to those. We've got them in our chart. We'll respond to each of you individually after the podcast. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Scott, thank you very much for joining us. Thanks. I really enjoyed this time.
Thanks.
And we'll talk to you all next month. Cheers.